China says it has brokered a peace deal between the ruling military junta and a rebel resistance group in Myanmar. A ceasefire between the two came into effect on Sunday, halting fighting near the Chinese border. David Mathieson is an independent Myanmar analyst and he joins me now. David, good to have you on the program. Now, there are many rebel groups resisting military rule in Myanmar, but who are the MNDAA, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army?
Well, they're an ethnic Chinese armed outfit that was formed in 1989, and they used to be part of the Burma Communist Party. And they signed a ceasefire agreed to a ceasefire back in 1989, and largely stayed out of fighting the central state until 2009, in which they went back into open revolt. And they've aligned with a whole number of different armed groups since the coup d'etat, and have been fighting the central state, and basically staged this daring operation in October 2023, which captured huge amounts of territory along the China border and all throughout northern Myanmar.
So the Chinese Foreign Ministry says it has brokered a peace deal. Is that your understanding?
Well, that's what they say. What that actually means on the ground, I think, are probably two different things. After this Operation 1027, as I was mentioning, the fighting in October 2023, after a few months of that fighting, China brokered an agreement called the halting Agreement with what's called the Three Brotherhood Alliance, which is the three big groups that staged that operation. And what happened there was that it seemed like it was some kind of ceasefire agreement, but fighting actually continued. The State Administration Council, the military regime, continued to bomb civilians all the way through northern Shan State. And then in June of last year, the second phase of this Operation 1027 happened. And in very, very dramatic, unprecedented fashion, the MNDAA took over the northern Shan State capital city of Lashio and has held onto it since then. Now, the Chinese government didn't mention this, but there have been some rumours that part of the deal is that the Kokang group, the MNDAA, is meant to relinquish the city of Lashio back to the State Administration Council, the Myanmar military. But we're going to have to wait and see if that's actually going to transpire.
Yes, and if China is involved, what does that tell us about sort of Beijing's sway over Myanmar's military rulers?
I think there's a certain amount of influence there. And there's a certain degree of influence over the armed groups. I mean, it's got to be remembered that China's actually backing all sides to this conflict in very complicated ways. It's been selling weapons to the Myanmar military for more than 30 years, but it also allows arms sales to go through to the Three Brotherhood Alliance and to various resistance groups up in the north and throughout northern Myanmar. And it needs to do this to balance its massive economic interests throughout the country. And so, for example, one ally of the MNDAA, the Arakan Army, which operates up in the north, but also operates in the far west on the border with Bangladesh, they have now surrounded more than a dozen major Chinese economic investments. So China's got this very delicate balancing act between the regime and all of these different groups, and it's not really taking a side at all. It's just managing the conflict. So we've got to wait and see whether this ceasefire actually means a cessation of hostilities, which I very much doubt.
Yes, so that sort of begs the question then, if it benefits one way or the other, then why would China be so invested in this peace deal and a halt in fighting?
I think what it really wants is stability and predictability. And it wants to be able to exert a certain kind of influence over various actors so that it can resume all of these Belt and Road activities. But I think what this agreement on the weekend really says is that China's getting more and more concerned about the direction the country is going and is quite unsure about who's actually going to prevail. And so it's trying to get all sides to sit together and talk about resuming border trade, calming things down, and preserving China's interests. And whether an agreement like this will actually succeed in that objective remains to be seen. They've apparently set a deadline to give the city of Lashio back in June. But it's got to be remembered that all of these resistance forces control the roads to the west of that city and to the north. And so giving back that one city is not actually going to end the war. And you've got to think of this in the broad context of Myanmar Civil War, in which literally hundreds of armed groups are invested in toppling the military regime. And this is just one very important, but still one segment of that nationwide struggle.
Yes, and as you mentioned, there are so many groups that are sort of, that are based themselves in the border regions, not just near China, but also Thailand and India. You've got the Karen National Liberation Army, the Kachin's Independence Army, etc. But, how might China even, or maybe the other players, the other neighbors there, might even consider any sort of arrangement with Myanmar to at least stop the fighting there?
I think China probably has the most influence out of any neighbour, although Thailand's very, very influential when it comes to various armed groups. India to a certain extent, Bangladesh, of course. But I think the neighbours are the most immediate international interlocutors that can actually sway some of the parties to the conflict. But again, I think we have to recognise that that's actually quite limited. And I think all sides aren't genuinely interested in any kind of peaceful agreement just yet. I think that there's still a lot of fighting that will probably go on. And any ceasefire deal or peace deal, I think like the history of ceasefires and peace deals in Myanmar won't actually bring peace onto the ground and actually improve the lives of civilians. It's more wrangling at a more elite political level, a lot of these talks. And there's frankly no international mediation mechanism that's been working over the past 4 years and probably won't in the near future. So what we're going to have are these kind of patchwork agreements put together by China and perhaps Thailand to a certain extent that won't actually bring an end to the conflict.
Yes, and I'm interested to know your thoughts on the current military leader, General Min Aung Hlaing. Does he differ in any way to the previous military leader that was there before, this sort of quasi-democratic period where Aung San Suu Kyi was around? And I'm talking about General Tan Shwe. Are they different in how they're going to deal with this?
Actually not. There's not a lot of sentimentality when it comes to Myanmar military leaders and kind of giving reverence to previous leaders. And in fact, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing recently has been kind of in an oblique kind of way has been criticising General Tan Shwe and trying to blame the lack of electricity not on his economic mismanagement and the shocks to the economy that the coup injected, but kind of blaming the previous regime, saying if only those projects had been finished, there'd be more electricity, and blaming things on his on the former president U Thein Sein. So he's instead of kind of paying homage to previous military leaders, he's kind of dragging their names through the mud and blaming them for things that he's actually to blame for. So no, he's really not respecting previous military dictators at all. And it's one of those sad realities in Myanmar that people are kind of nostalgic about the rule of Tan Shwe, thinking that at least he was a more effective dictator. So that's a measure of just how desperate things are getting in Myanmar, that people are saying things like that.
Okay, David Mathieson, really appreciate your insights into a story that is quite difficult to tell. Thank you so much.
Thank you.